That was a good story.
Yes, yes.
Now, you were born just prior to the Civil War, Mr. President, as you know, of course. Do you have any particular memories of that period?
Well, I was just a boy, 6 or 7 at the time, but, well, I was aware of what was going on, you see. Now, my father was a merchant and collector of the port of New York City and was quite involved in the Union cause. Now, what's interesting is that my mother, a charming and gracious woman, Martha Bullock, was born in Roswell, Georgia. And she was an avid sympathizer of the Confederate cause. As a matter of fact, her brother was an admiral in the Confederate Navy.
I see. So then you experienced the disagreements of the Civil War right in your own home.
Yes, well, during the Civil War, we were living on 20th Street in Lower Manhattan, and we had a balcony in front of our second-floor window. And I remember one afternoon, my mother draping the Confederate flag over the balcony railing, much to the chagrin of my father and the shouting, fist-waving crowd down below. She caused a near riot. But one must admit she did have spirit.
Yes, indeed. Speaking of spirit, Mr. President, in just a moment here, we're going to be bringing out that very exciting lady, Queen Cleopatra of ancient Egypt. I don't suppose she'll intimidate you.
Oh, goodness, no, fascinating woman.
Indeed, yes.
I must ask her what she thinks about the subject you're all talking about today.
Oh, what's that?
Women's liberation.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm sure she'll be glad. How do you feel about it?
Oh, well, I've always felt that a woman should have the same rights as a man. And in this country, she must. In my days, women responded wonderfully well to my progressive campaigns. Perhaps they had a more sensitive awareness of the social injustices than men.
It's possible.
Now, I'm reminded in this connection that one of the most noble chapters in the history of our country was written by that wonderful woman who conducted the affairs of Hull House in Chicago. I refer, of course, to Jayne Addams.
Jayne Addams, yes.
Yes, you know, it always seemed disgraceful to me that those who are motivated by charitable concern for the well-being of their fellow citizens are often described by some heartless people as bleeding hearts or do-gooders. Well, I was so described myself.
Oh, were you?
Yes, but we must realize that what our society needs is more do-gooders.
Well, now, Mr. President, that's a very pretty sentiment, which obviously appealed to our audience here. But if you'll forgive me, sir, I wonder if you might not be guilty of some inconsistency.
Oh?
I've been doing some research on you, naturally, preparing for this interview, and I learned that in 1906, you personally criticized the writers and journalists who were exposing corruption in business and politics at that time. You compared them, in fact, sir, to the muckraker in John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. Now,
yes, that's correct.
Couldn't it be said, Mr. President, that those muckrakers or crusading journalists, as they would naturally describe themselves, also could be classified as do-gooders?
Well, yes, I suppose so, but I think what you have here is the question of whose ox is being gored. Now, naturally, I wasn't in favor of corruption, either in politics or in business, but the writers that you refer to had just gone too far.
Oh?
Yeah, they seemed to delight in offering sensational and gossipy details. Of course, I must concede that judgment is just a matter of opinion.
Yes. Well, forgive the interruption, Mr. President. You had started to tell us about Jayne Addams.
Oh, yes. Well, she was one of the greatest do-gooders of all time. She established Hull House in Chicago in 1898 for the sole purpose of helping women and children and immigrants find their useful place in society. She and her friends campaigned tirelessly against sweatshop conditions and child labor. As a matter of fact, it was largely through her efforts that the Illinois state legislature passed the first factory law prohibiting the employment of children below the age of 14.
Is that right?
That's right. It also fixed an 8-hour workday for women and provided for the inspection of factory labor conditions by the state.
Well, sir, you say that in such a tone that you seem to be implying that there was great opposition. Now, who could possibly have opposed such a reasonable law?
Well, the answer, Mr. Allen, is practically everybody in power opposed such humane and civilized laws.
Really?
Oh, the masses of the people naturally wanted better conditions, but the ruling powers resisted such progressive legislation for as long as they could get away with it. And I am astounded to observe that today, more than half a century later, they're still getting away with it here and there.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. We naturally have a great many more questions we'll put to you a bit later. Our next guest is certainly one of the most remarkable women in all history. She became Queen of Egypt 51 years before the birth of Christ, when she was only 18. She would have been considered unusual, I'm sure, in any age, because she was strikingly intelligent, so attractive that both Julius Caesar and the other great general Mark Antony fell in love with her. And yet she also had the instincts of a master.